Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am back with my September wrap-up. I was so nervous that I was going to read very little in September, and as you may have guessed from the thumbnail, that was not true. I read a ton this month, partly because I was just in a really great reading groove, and partly because I got sick at the end of the month and had nothing else to do for a long stretch of time. First off, I finished The Vanished Days by Susanna Kearsley, which is the latest in her Slains or Scottish series. This was okay. I was really looking forward to it because I loved The Winter Sea, I quite liked Firebird. This one didn't grab me as much because it's more of a prequel than it is a sequel, and quite honestly, I could not remember who these characters were and how they fit into the characters that we meet in the other two books. So that level of intrigue that comes with a prequel wasn't really there for me. In addition, it's a lot darker than Susanna Kearsley books that I have read up to this point. The main character, this little girl, goes through so much. There's the death of her father, there's pedophilia and child molestation and being a runaway, being almost a slave at various points. She just goes from bad situation to bad situation, and it wasn't the cozy Scottish romance that I've come to expect from Susanna Kearsley. So while it was well written, it was also a slight disappointment. Then I also read The Heroines Bookshelf by Erin Blakemore, which was one of the challenge books from the My Mother Picks My TBR series. So I'm very happy that I read it. And it was just fun, and I honestly think this is what sparked my huge need to read this month. Because this book, a chapter at a time, goes through a heroine and its author from classic literature and talks about what can we learn from her and from the woman who created her. And it was just wonderful. It reaffirmed everything I love about reading, everything I love about classics, and it was just this beautiful warm hug. And if you are also a cozy classic reader, I think you might really enjoy this. Then I moved on to The Tale of Princess Fatima, Warrior Woman, which is an ancient Arab epic about Princess Fatima, who is an incredible warrior, and detailing various pieces of her life. I will say this is not the entire epic about her. The translator and editor did pick bits and pieces because apparently the full epic is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long. But these were the highlights from this story. And it was really interesting. It was interesting to read such a feminist work that is so old. It was interesting to see how the ancient Arab world dealt with things like race, with the interplay between Muslims and Christians who were living in the area, for better and for worse. And I'm really glad that Penguin republished it. It was difficult to follow at times because those sections in between each of the scenes were missing. So it was sometimes hard to follow, okay, how did we get to this point? But the stories themselves were really interesting, so I would definitely read it. I also listened to Ordeal by Innocence by Agatha Christie, and this was an interesting read in that it was probably the most ludicrous setup that I have ever seen or heard in an Agatha Christie. This is one of her standalones. So we follow this man as he goes to visit this old isolated house. And the family in this house have been dealing with the fact that one of their sons, Jacko, was accused of murdering their mother, and he was since executed for that. So this man turns up at their house a few years later and says, I needed to tell you this. Jacko didn't kill your wife and your mother. He had claimed throughout the entire trial that this man had picked him up in his car and he could corroborate his story, but no one could find this man. The man who turns up at the house said, I was the man driving the car. However, the reason none of this came out at the time is that our main character had, after he had dropped Jacko off wherever he wanted to go, he had been hit by a bus, had amnesia for a while, and then went off to explore Antarctica, and only found out about this on his return to England when he started looking through the papers. That is the most ridiculous setup for an Agatha Christie mystery I have ever heard. In addition, the tension was great once this is revealed, as they all start to look at each other and think, well, if it wasn't Jacko, it must have been one of us. Which one of us was it? But it does also deal with some other topics not very well, such as the fact that all of the children in this family are adopted, and it looks at both infertility and a woman's desire to adopt children, and the effect that it could potentially have on those children in a very negative way, which may sometimes be true, but it isn't always true. Also, given Agatha Christie's own life, I'm wondering how much of that was autobiographical for her. But if you have adopted, or if you were adopted, that may be a little bit uncomfortable for you. One of these adopted children is also biracial, and when her background and her parents are talked about, it's not terribly comfortable either. So overall, I'm going to watch the miniseries because that was made so much more recently. I'm wondering if they maybe tweaked or changed some of that dialogue and how some of those themes were dealt with. And so I'm glad I read it for that reason, but I don't think I'll be keeping this one. I then read Empty Theater by an author whose name I still don't know how to pronounce. I think it might be Yak Yemk. But if you know, please let me know down below because I feel really terrible potentially mispronouncing her name. But this is a novel that looks at Ludwig II of Bavaria and Empress Elizabeth of Austria and puts their lives side by side as they grow up. And it was really, really well done. The line between fiction and nonfiction is almost invisible. There is a little moment at the end that you can tell was definitely added for dramatic effect. But by and large, most of the novel is really beautifully done and with great attention to detail. And if Yakyemk added any elements to help move the narrative along, they feel really plausible. I'm not as well versed in German and Austrian history, but I couldn't tell for most of it what was real and what was fiction. It was also really nice to mentally go on vacation to both of those places again. I've visited Neuschwanstein and Hohenschwangau. I've visited Vienna and Schönbrunn and all of those palaces. So it was really lovely getting to see them again. Ludwig II was a huge fan and a great friend of Richard Wagner, for better or for worse. And so it was fun getting to see Wagner feature and his operas feature and seeing Ludwig's reaction, hearing about the popular reaction. Overall, it was a really, really well done book. Given that I felt so sick at the time, it was also incredibly depressing because it is very dark. Both characters had incredible mental turmoil because of the situations that they were placed in. Empress Elizabeth had this enormous pressure to follow all kinds of protocols and be perfect at all times, which then created all sorts of other issues like potential eating disorders. Ludwig II was not prepared to be king. He would have been far better suited to something in the arts. He may or may not have been gay. All of these things, along with their governmental responsibilities, made for a really difficult time for both of them, hence why Yakyem contrasted them in the first place. So it does make for difficult reading, but it is beautiful reading. Then I started to read The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in the Ship of Her Own Making by Catherine M. Valenti, which I was really looking forward to. That title just sounds so whimsical, and as my friend Lauren said when I described it to her, that sounds like a Panic at the Disco title, which it totally does, and that made me even more excited to read it, but I just couldn't get into it. It is incredibly whimsical, but to the point where you can't tell what the end goal is. September isn't going on a journey with any sort of purpose, with any sort of objective. She seems to be going because she feels like it. None of the other characters have a great deal of drive behind them. It just felt a little bit like Alice in Wonderland, really, in that there was so much whimsy, but it wasn't leading anywhere, and that was very unsatisfying to me. So I did DNF this one. And I moved on to Creativity by John Cleese, which is exactly what it says, a short and cheerful guide to creativity, how to cultivate it, how to nurture it in your own life. And it's full of really great, really practical advice, things that John Cleese has done himself or has heard other people do in the field, and then backs it up with actual psychology and science. And it was really fun, and I'm glad that I have it. Then the main reason that I read quite so many books is that I started on a project this month where I am going through 3 of the American Girl series that had books come out in the older format, but that I did not personally read. I was a little bit too old when they came out. So I'm going back rereading them now, and then hopefully going to contrast them with the newer book versions that are coming out for their historical characters. So I won't tell you much about them here. I'm going to save that for that vlog project, which will hopefully come out in a month or 2. But firstly, I read the Caroline series, which follows Caroline Abbott, who is living on the shores of Lake Ontario during the War of 1812, so the second war between the Americans and the British. And her father being a shipbuilder and living so close to the Canadian border, this creates all sorts of trouble for them. So each character gets 6 books typically, so I read 6 Caroline stories, along with 2 mysteries that go along with her after the 6 main novels. So I read Traitor in the Shipyard, followed by The Traveler's Tricks. These are mostly written by the same author as the main 6 books, but sometimes they change it. Then I read the Marie Grace and Cecile books, who are a pair of characters, which this was the first and only time American Girl did this, where both girls live in New Orleans in 1854, but we get to see both the experience of being a white person in New Orleans and being a black person in New Orleans pre-Civil War. And that was really fascinating for a number of reasons, which I will enumerate in the vlog. But it means that yes, there are 6 books, but there are really 3 per character, and they tend to overlap. So I did read all 6 of those. And then I started to read the mysteries associated with both girls. So I finished the first Marie Grace mystery. I am currently reading the Cecile mystery. And then there's one more that I think features both of them. So those are all of the books that I read in September. Let me know down below if you have recommendations for me based on the ones that I enjoyed, or recommendations of things I might enjoy more than the ones that I did not enjoy. Let me know what your favorite reads of the month were, and anything else that you feel like telling me. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.